So welcome everyone to the 2021 Stride Product Showcase. It's a 3-day virtual event. We will feature innovative tools and strategies and products to solve today's transportation challenges. My name is Lily Eleftherianou. I'm the director of the University of Florida Transportation Institute, and I'm also the director of Stride. I want to recognize Ondine Wells and Inez Avila-Spadoni and Mitch Darigo for organizing the showcase and doing such a great job. Thank you. The Stride Center is the 2016 US DOT Region 4 Southeast University Transportation Center, funded by the US DOT. It's housed at the University of Florida Transportation Institute. Our mission is to develop novel strategies for reducing congestion. And this showcase presents some of the products that we have developed so far. And our hope and our aim for organizing the showcase is for you to review these. We hope you find them useful. We hope you find them as a great resource for reducing congestion for your region. So today you'll hear presentations from researchers at all our partner institutions shown on the map. Each day in the showcase, we'll focus on a different theme. The registration link that you use today will allow you access to all 3 days of the event. And if you'd like to look at the full agenda, you can take a look at our event page on the link shown on the screen. And Ondine will be providing the link in the chat box as well. And now I'd like to introduce you to today's moderator, Noreen McDonald, who will be guiding the discussions around today's theme on transit and mobility options. Noreen is the chair of the City and Regional Planning Department at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she's the Thomas Willis Lambeth Distinguished Chair in Public Policy. She leads the Stride Partnership at the University of North Carolina. So over to you, Noreen.
Great, thank you, Lily. I'm pleased to moderate today's event focused on transit and mobility options. I'd like to start by welcoming our 3 panelists. Melissa McCready is the Director of Transportation and Mobility for the City of Gainesville. Matthew Palmer serves as the Executive Director for School Planning, Design, and Construction for Durham Public Schools. And Jacob Yan is a Research Assistant Professor in Civil Engineering at the University of Florida. Today, we will hear from 5 Stride researchers about their latest tools and strategies in transit and mobility. You can find each person's bio in our program booklet on the Stride website, and there'll also be a link in the chat. Each Stride researcher has prepared a short video about their product. Following the video, we'll have time for some questions and answers with our presenters, panelists, and attendees. If you have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And then at the very end, we'll also have time for a fuller discussion where we can look across all of these wonderful products that have been developed through the Stride Research Program and think about strategies for implementation. So moving on to our next slide, our first product today is a web mapping tool for bus delays presented by Kai Monast at the North Carolina State University and the Institute for Transportation Research and Education.
I'm excited today to introduce our congestion web mapping tool for school districts and transit agencies. This tool was created for the project Locating and Costing Congestion for School Buses and Public Transportation. This tool provides insight into when and where congestion is occurring within a service area in a clear and accessible online mapping tool. Do you know how many hours of delay your agency experiences from recurring congestion? Do you know how much this delay costs annually for operating and capital replacement expenses? Do you know where you should target efforts to address recurring congestion? To answer these questions, we calculated the minutes of delay per vehicle by corridor by hour of the day. Then we multiplied the minutes of delay per vehicle by the number of school or public transit buses that pass through the corridor to determine the cumulative congestion impact. For this process to be replicated elsewhere, school districts and transit agencies will need access to and familiarity with school bus routing software, transit feeds, and congestion data. For our project, we used EduLog, GTFS, and RIDIS data, respectively. The GIF to the right displays the minutes of delay per vehicle for each hour of the day for one of our study areas, Durham County. Corridors in red experience higher levels of congestion. Using this tool, school districts and transit planners can determine the best solution to mitigate congestion impacts and therefore reduce the costs associated with congestion. Some possible solutions to mitigate the congestion impacts might be implementing one of the following solutions: bus on shoulder, queue jumping, creating bus lanes, route diversion, and/or signal prioritization. For school districts, they can import this congestion data into their scheduling software, visualize where the congestion impacts are, and route their school buses to avoid these congestion corridors. To view the product, please use the link on this slide. A similar application will be set up for our other study area, Pinellas County, Florida.
Great. So now we're going to have time for question and answer about this product. So if you do have a question, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box, and then it'll be available to Kai as well as the panelists. So as the panelists are, and those of you in the audience are thinking about your question, I wanted to start with one for Kai, which is a question as you think about this prototype tool that your team has developed. What type of agencies do you see it being most useful to, and particularly what level of technical expertise do you think is needed?
Thanks, Noreen. First off, I put the link, obviously you can't click on the video presented on Zoom, so I put the link in the chat box, and you'll have two choices. You can pull up Durham County, North Carolina, or Pinellas County, Florida. And there's 4 choices in there, 4 check boxes, and you can pick what you just want to see: the minutes of vehicular delay, or delay for the school bus, delay for the transit bus, or delay for both the school and transit buses. And then there's a slider bar that allows you to scroll through time, so you can see how the delay changes. So to get to your question, Noreen, what we've done is we looked at the public mobility modes of public transit and pupil transportation. And we think, because we're presenting the data both individually for those modes and combined, we think there's really 3 audiences. We obviously have the school districts and the LEAs, local education authorities. And we have the public transit agencies and their associated agencies such as city and county transportation planners and MPOs and RPOs. And together, I think those would be the core users of these tools.
Did any members of any of the panelists have a question for Kai or a comment related that they could see a use for this tool in their own work?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Matthew Palmer with Durham Public Schools. As a partner on this project, I wanted to elaborate on Mr. Monas's points with regards to application for local practitioners in public education and transit service. Certainly, not only are there direct transit-related implications, but I would also point to some of the historic STRIDE-supported research that discusses land use and transportation. In particular, we have looked at the application of this resource and tools for land use and school siting decisions, about the geography of schools and where we decide to build a school. There are other, of course, feedback considerations with that, but I think it's a wonderful illustrative example of how this can be an instructive resource. Public education entities like the public school system.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Melissa, you have your hand raised.
So I just had a question about how is this different than some of the existing software that's already out there to do this exact same thing?
To do the exact same thing, I'm not aware of any software that does what we've done here. So we've combined congestion data with the GTFS-based school bus routes, so GTFS-based transit bus routes, plus the school bus routes, which are usually not publicly available information.
Okay, so yeah, I guess I shouldn't say exact, but similar, because I know we have a transit agency in the city and we use very similar software now to track our buses and to look at where they are in real time and do the sorts of things that you're presenting. I'm not as familiar with the school bus side of it, so I guess I'm trying to understand how this helps, because traditionally a public transit agency doesn't coordinate with the school bus agency. So understanding how would you expect this to be implemented, I guess is my question.
Can I share the screen, Anjin?
Yes, you should have that capability.
I didn't.
Okay.
All right, I do. Screen one. So what we're looking at with this tool is not current traffic conditions, but it's historic traffic conditions. And there's a particular corridor in Durham that would be of concern, probably right around here, that over the period of 10 or 12 years, congestion has increased about 45 seconds per year. Now, over time, that makes a big difference if you're running a bus, because it means that you have to run more buses just to maintain the same number, same frequency, and the same headway. So what we've done here is we're through time of the day, and this being the 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock hour, in general, our public mobility services are experiencing delay in these corridors. And so we can now focus our attention to these corridors by rerouting the vehicles around the corridors if possible, or coming up with context-sensitive solutions such as bus lane or queue jumping at the signals. And so it's a planning tool. It's not an operational tool. So I think what you're talking about, automatic vehicle location, that allows us to see the buses right now, today, and where they're being impacted by congestion. But this is a planning tool that allows us to see in general where they're being impacted by congestion so that we can adapt our operations and our infrastructure to overcome these challenges.
Okay, so again, there is some similar software out there that we already do use for our transit planning, which does some of this incorporation into it. And then we also have the same software that we can, or different software that we're using for real-time transit rerouting. So I guess that's why I was just looking at how, looking at both the school bus and the public transit agency, what sort of efficiencies are you hoping to gain, or what exactly is the purpose of what you're trying to achieve here in looking at both of those at the same time, just from a congestion mitigation perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah, the reason why we wanted to put the two together is, like you said, they're usually planned for, presented, reported on, analyzed completely separately, which is not that helpful considering they're basically doing the same thing. They're just serving a different client base. And you know, in the peak periods tend to overlap, and these people who are riding the bus are doing the thing that is most helpful for getting congestion to be taken care of, and yet they're being impacted by the congestion. I think that's a powerful story. And so when we can locate where this congestion is impacting our buses and therefore our bus riders, I think we can start to quantify the impacts and make a better argument. And public transit on its own, I think, is not nearly as strong as an argument when you're talking about a kindergartner who's also subjected to a ride time of 1 hour and 15 minutes because of congestion. They have to get up at 6 a.m. That's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for anybody. It's not a good way to spend your time.
Right. So using the software, then I would think that we would be able to look at this, not necessarily from planning of the operation itself, but more of what we can do to change the built environment to really promote transit.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. That was a great conversation, and I think sort of highlights the usefulness of this dialogue and the way, particularly Melissa's comments sort of honed in on how the product could be used at the transportation planning level. We'll move on now to the next presenter, and that is machine learning methodologies for micromobility travel demand and Sermo Labs micromobility analytics platform by Shilei Zhao, and her video will be playing next. And similarly, if you do have a question, jot it in the Q&A, and then we will have more dialogue after the video plays.
Hello, everyone. This is Shilei Zhao. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Coastal Engineering at the University of Florida. Today, I will introduce two products developed by our lab. The first product is a new machine learning methodology for micromobility travel demand forecasting. The second product is a micromobility analytics platform. So this research aims to address micromobility related issues such as parking violations, safety issues, its relationship with other travel modes, among others, in order to facilitate micromobility planning and operations. Facing all different kinds of issues, stakeholders need tools to help them accurately forecast the demand, monitor the system operations, and analyze people's travel patterns. Therefore, we created two products. The first product is a machine learning model to forecast the micromobility demand. This product can generate accurate predictions at the zonal level, such as the block group level or even the street segment level. The second product is a micromobility analytics platform, which is illustrated over here on this diagram. This platform has three different modules. The first module is a reporting module. It allows residents to report different kinds of incidents and leave a comment on the map. The second module is a mapping module, which can show the real-time availability of the scooters and also show the incident reports provided by the residents in real time. The third module is the analytics module, and it includes three major functionalities. The first one is the equity monitor. The second one is the parking violation detector. The third one is a trip pattern analysis. So the micromobility companies can use our machine learning model for deployment decision making. They can use the demand forecasting to help them make decisions about where to deploy the e-scooter vehicles in the cities and how to do recharging and rebalancing efforts. The cities can use our analytics platform to monitor and regulate micromobility operations. For example, by looking at the incident reports, they can identify the hotspots of potential accidents and near misses, and therefore to design policies to enhance the safety of the micromobility services. They can also use our analytics platform to monitor the scooter companies' operations. For example, they can see where are the parking violations happening in the city. Thank you all very much. If you are very interested in our products, please feel free to contact me directly through my email listed over here.
Great, that was a fascinating project to learn about. Shilei, I will start the questions and then we'll go to others. But you talked about stakeholders in general in your presentation, and you mentioned micromobility companies and cities. I guess sort of a two-parter, are those the entities that you see as the primary stakeholders? And then do you see like who is the prime target audience that you would be focused on?
Thank you for the question, Noreen. So I think the primary audience of our product is definitely public entities such as cities and transit agencies. So especially as you can see, the micromobility analytics platform is mainly designed for cities to essentially monitor the micromobility operations in real time and receive complaints or comments from the local residents about the near misses, crashes, parking violations, etc., and also help them develop innovative policies services to enhance the operations of the micromobility services. But that being said, we also had a machine learning model for to kind of forecast the micromobility demand very accurately in real time. And this kind of model can be used by city as well to understand how people are using the system. But it can also be very useful for scooter companies to understand where are the demand happening and how, and they can use this type of information to enhance their rebalancing efforts.
Melissa.
Thanks. So there are some similar folks out there who are aggregating data now from the different micromobility vendors that we then use to look at our reporting. I have a question though, how are you getting the data to inform your platform? So are you working with the vendors to understand how the devices are getting used and where they're getting used? How are you informing accidents and that sort of thing?
That's a great question. So I think our data is coming from different sources. So we have, so our lab is doing a web scraping of the general bike share fleet specification data around the country for, I think, around more than 2 years already, actually. So we have a very large database in-house that can help us to do, real-time availability, parking violation, equity constraint, all those different kinds of things for real-time monitoring. In terms of the safety-related data, so that's kind of, we already developed the tools, but we don't have the data yet. So I was hoping cities, for example, like Gainesville, if you guys have any interest of using this product. So we already have the prototype ready. So all different kinds of functionalities ready, and we can adapt the product for different cities' contexts. So this tool is ready for use, but it's a crowdsourcing tool. So we don't have any data for that part of the product. But we're also working with e-scooter companies, especially Spin. So they are providing some data for us, and we can use their data to help us inform some of the information cannot be generated from the GBFS data. So and this project is actually, so we are working with planner Jacob Yan, who is also the panelist. Jacob, am I missing anything? Do you want to add anything over here?
Well, maybe one thing to add is, Melissa, the machine learning models, the use for cities is to understand where are the parking needs, because the trip destinations estimated from the machine learning models are also the places where the parking needs will be. So it will help inform the design of the parking zones, where you put the geofences or install bike racks, something like that.
And have you looked at some of the competition that's already out in the field for that, like Ride Report or Remix?
Yes, we are familiar with the tools already out there, but what I want to say is, so we are, universities, so our goals is more focusing on doing research and also transform our research into practice. So we are not for profit, we're not trying to sell anything to the cities. So essentially, we are trying to use to see if the tech transfer components of our project will be useful for the cities, and you guys can use it. We are hoping to also open source a lot of tools in the short term as soon as the paper is published.
Okay, so I think that perhaps the fine niche that you might be able to add to this is pulling in that accident data, because that's not done by the vendors. They have no interest in looking at when accidents occur or where they're occurring. Okay. So as an open platform or as a nonprofit that's not trying to make money off of this, I think if you're able to provide a better picture of how the devices are getting used, where potential accidents might be occurring, that could also go back to a built environment or user behavior sort of thing. Yeah. And then also, we're not actually, we don't issue a lot of parking violations. We're working with the vendors when it comes to the parking violations. So I think understanding where people are leaving them is great, and that you're able to pulling that information is great. But like I said, I think if you can present bring in a more holistic picture of how the devices are getting used from the different angles where vendors aren't going to pull that information, that might be a piece of this that would be extremely useful to a city.
Sounds great. Thank you, Melissa.
We have a question from one of the audience members. How interactive is the tool? Is it possible for the user to input data?
Yes, so the tool is very interactive. So we have a user side of our app. So we have that product ready. So the users can download the app and report anything on the maps directly. And once the user input that this kind of reporting on the map, so then the city will have a kind of another side of the tools, like a database, can in real time, they can monitor those reports provided by the users. So essentially we have two ends, a user end and also a city end. So these two ends are highly interactive as well.
And where have you deployed the tool?
So we haven't deployed the tool yet. So we designed everything based on two cities. One is Gainesville, the other one is Washington, D.C. We have a lot of data. So we are in contact with definitely Melissa and also the D.C. DOT over there. So we are trying to see if this product can be deployed in those cities in the near future.
Great. Before we move on, let me just check if there's any last questions from the panel or from the audience. All right, well, thank you, Sheila. It's a fascinating product.
Thank you, Noreen.
So our next product is an autonomous vehicle user perception survey from Justin Mason at the University of Florida.
Justin Mason, and I'm a junior faculty member at the University of Florida, and I'm here to share our tool with you. And our tool is titled the Automated Vehicle User Perception Survey, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So the big picture here is that this tool allows stakeholders, local and state agencies, and researchers and clinicians to assess individuals' perceptions of fully automated vehicles. An example of a fully automated vehicle is a vehicle that can drive itself without a human operator. And that right here is the automated shuttle, which is located and driving around downtown Gainesville right now. So FAVs, or fully automated vehicles, may offer accessible and equitable transportation to really be a key in that first mile, last mile dilemma, which is how do people get to a primary mode of transportation? And then how do they get from their mode of transportation to their final destination? And we believe that the automated shuttle may be one key to solving this issue or dilemma. But users must accept and adopt this technology, and we need to know more about their perceptions, which is why we developed this tool. So we went through a lot of psychometric testing, we worked with subject matter experts, and we worked with the layperson, and that allowed us to develop a tool that was both valid and reliable. That tool can be broken down into subscales, which represent intention to use, perceived barriers of accepting this technology, their perceived well-being that may change due to using this technology, and as well as a total acceptance score, which really includes 24 items where the others can be broken up. And if you just really want to know about perceived barriers, you can use those 6 items on their own without using the entire scale. And that can be found at our publication here, which is open access in Frontiers in Psychology. And I'll provide a link to that as well. So the survey can be downloaded from this publication. It's also available in Qualtrics format if you'd like to use web-based, but you can also print it. And if you decide to print it, this is scaled to be a 100mm line or 10 centimeters. And the score ranges from 0 to 100. So 0mm would be here and 100mm would be on the far right. And you can just measure that using a ruler. So for implementation, the items that align with the scales are broken down on table 2 of our publication, but I've also provided it here. So for example, these 13 items right here align with intention to use. That individual would have to answer all 13 items, and then you just take an average of those items to provide an intention to use score. And the same would go for perceived barriers, well-being, and then total acceptance, which includes almost all of the items on here. So the impact of this tool would be that you can assess individuals' perceptions of fully automated vehicles after demonstration projects Or you can assess fully automated vehicles as an alternative mode of transportation, since we typically rely on driving ourselves, and that ability to drive ourselves declines with age. So this is just one other mode of transportation that might help people stay active in the community. So if this is of interest to you, don't hesitate to contact me. My email is right here, justinmason@phhp.ufl.edu, and the survey can be downloaded from the supplementary material in our Frontiers publication. Thank you very much.
So Justin, thanks for the presentation. I'm going to start with a question. I'm curious who your team envisioned as the stakeholders that might want to use such a survey.
Yeah, great question, Noreen. So I'm housed in the occupational therapy department. So I think that was part of our goal, was to design this for clinicians or for, say, like people evaluating driving, say like a driving rehab specialist, that we had in mind. And then we also kind of thought of, there's going to be, and there's continuing to be, a lot of demonstration projects. So we thought that would be useful as well. So more from like a city planning or just public perceptions. So we kind of tried to balance both of those and not get too holistic with what the shuttle may or may not do for an individual.
Great. Matthew Palmer, one of our panelists, has a question, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald, and Dr. Mason, thank you for your work. I wonder if any of your surveys have been administered to students that or under the age of 18, and if you've noted any differentials with regards to perceptions for fully autonomous vehicles from children, youth, adolescents, et cetera, from to the general population.
Great question. Unfortunately, we haven't surveyed anyone under 18. It just becomes an IRB nightmare. Not that that's not of interest to us, but the populations we've utilized the survey in would be younger. So really throughout the lifespan, younger being 18 and all the way up to older, and that was around 91. We've utilized it in a few special populations, which would be people living with certain disabilities, people with a spinal cord injury and whatnot. But we haven't compared, we haven't looked at truly younger individuals. And then we also haven't compared drivers versus non-drivers, so people that may have retired or ceased driving. So those two populations are definitely of interest. Looks like Melissa may have a question.
I do. Shocking, right? So I am curious if you have thought about talking to the autonomous vehicle vendors or manufacturers as they look at new markets to expand into, of working that they could maybe use this as a tool to work with cities to partner or to implement their devices or their units or their vehicles or whatever they're calling them as a way to show any sort of community interest, or if the communities are interested, I guess I'm saying the same thing, but if the communities are interested or if they think it would be helpful for the community, that having that data beforehand would be useful to a vendor who's trying to sell their product to different locations to get them in use.
Yeah, so the validity and reliability, not necessarily of the data, but more of the tool being utilized, isn't always a primary concern, because they need to focus on it being feasible and maybe just using one or two items. So we haven't necessarily gone out of our way to make those collaborations occur. We do have a few that are ongoing or about to begin that are funded through FDOT, and their connections with different agencies as well. But no, we haven't reached out. Just a lot of times it has to do with feasibility and kind of getting those few items that they really want to know the answer to, rather than it being more like robust. So the answer is yes and no, but it is something that we have in the back of our mind.
Okay.
Thank you, Melissa. Jacob, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, Noreen, you are muted. So, but I hear you. My question is, Justin, how there are a lot of transportation planners or engineers doing similar surveys, right? So how does your tool differ. Like your background in occupational therapy probably focus on different things than the transportation planners and engineers. So what's the difference? How do your tool complement the other tools, maybe?
Yeah, great question. I think Dr. McDonald kind of threw that one up to me as well as a softball. So we do have a more holistic approach. We focus on well-being and a few other quality of life determinants. So that is also integrated within the scale. And then there's also some of the more historic questions related to like intention to use, perceived usefulness, and other things that actually play a big indicator for their acceptance practices. So we do look a little bit more holistically at quality of life and other determinants. That would be, I'd say, the main difference. And then a lot of times those other questionnaires get validated just in the sample that they have, because they'll use like a CFA or like a confirmatory factor analysis, where we ended up validating this in individuals 18 to 91. And then, yeah, so we ended up using a broader range of population or of our sample. And I think that kind of helps with it as well. So it's really kind of a tool to be used for like a pre and a post comparison rather than just utilizing it one time. Not that you can't use it one time, you'll just get better information if you deploy it at least twice.
Great. Well, thank you, Justin. Really interesting application of your tool on sort of the frontiers of travel modes. Now we're going to turn to Lily Du, who will be talking about her project, Data-Driven Approach for First and Last Mile Gaps and Hybrid Transit Services.
Good afternoon. This is Lily Du, Associate Professor from UFTI. It's my great pleasure to share our recent study with you. The presentation is titled as Data-Driven Approach for First, Last Mile Gaps and Hybrid Transit Services. Through this project, we want to help cooperate transit with on-demand mobility services to improve transit ridership and mitigate traffic congestion. More exactly, we use the picture on the right to show our motivation. We noticed that the advance of communication and information technologies have enabled several emerging on-demand mobility services, including car sharing, bike sharing, microtransit, and so on. Those emerging modes provide convenient and flexible services, but they usually are with small capacity and will potentially introduce extra traffic and make our congestion and emission worse. On the other hand, transit is more sustainable, but cannot fully satisfy mobility needs due to its fixed schedule and routes. Transit users often suffer from the first and the last mile gaps. Therefore, one promising solution to address this problem is to cooperate the transit with these emerging mobility services so that we can take advantages of both types of mobility services. However, this is not an easy job, as the picture shows that people have recognized TNC, microtransit, and micromobility can be potential used in transit low-density areas for ad hoc demands or to complete the trips at transit first and the last mile gaps. But the state of the art shows that transit planners have insufficient or limited information on where and when we should link transit with on-demand mobility services to obtain the best performance. This project would provide an innovative data-driven approach to address these challenges. Our approach is to co-analyze transit and on-demand mobility service trajectory, and then use machine learning approach to identify those potential critical areas which are proper candidate locations for cooperating transit routes and on-demand mobility services. The idea behind this approach is that we notice existing on-demand mobility services are highly correlated with transit services. Mainly, those areas lacking sufficient transit coverage and flexibility will more likely the market that attract more on-demand mobility trips. Accordingly, investigating their trajectory data over a city network will help review interaction between those two types of mobility services and further identify the good candidate areas to cooperate with them. To implement our approach, we use trajectory data as input. including transit bus trajectory data and the trajectory data collected from other modes, such as vehicle GPS data of ride-sharing vehicles, back and private autos. Those trajectory data will be aggregated and graded by an optimization model and further processed by our algorithm to generate heat maps. Then we use machine learning approach to find those critical zones with interesting patterns on the heat map. Those zones infer potential critical areas for cooperating transit with other modes in the physical map, such as the first and the last mile gap. The future transportation system will be connected and multimodal. It will involve both public transit and private vehicle services, providing regular service with fixed schedules and irregular service, such as on-demand services. Our product contributes a data-driven method to find when and where the transit should cooperate with on-demand mobility services. It can potentially help transit increase ridership and ultimately help mitigate the traffic congestion and reduce emission. With this, it's come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me by the email on the slide.
Thanks, Lily. That was really wonderful to learn more about the work that your group has been doing. I'm curious, as you're thinking through this and you're thinking through your target audience, who is that target audience? Obviously, the first and last mile impacts many different individuals, but it seems you're aiming more at institutions and agencies. So could you help clarify that for me?
Yes, thank you, Noreen. Thank you for moderating this session and also ask questions. So for our product, I think we target at some planning operation office, such as DOT or MPO, because by crowdsourcing all this kind of trajectory data collected from ride sharing, micromobility, bus in different modes, we want to give those agencies or stakeholders a big picture. So over the city, a big map, and where are the potential areas, and the stakeholders such as FDOT or MPO can consider to implement potential, for example, macro transit or macro mobility, or add one more route to connect the backbone network with some emerging mobility service. So this is some the product or the insight this project want to provide.
I have a quick question. I think this is an interesting approach. I think the way that I know we could use something like this is to identify where the exchange of uses happen at the curb and to identify mobility hubs, which we've already started to do a little bit of. But the management of where those uses are exchanged, this kind of data would be extremely useful so that I think cities in particular, not just at the state or the regional level, but even down into the city level, to understand, I would even want to suggest adding a freight component, if you will, for pickup drop-off for like the Amazons and the FedExes and the whatever. But because what we're seeing a lot of is that exchange of uses at the curb and the demand of the curb and how cities are going to manage it, because that's ultimately who owns the right of way traditionally. But even at the state level, at the DOT level, there's also that conversation going on right now, as a matter of fact. But it's that exchange of the uses, and then how can the different entities who own that right of way manage all of those uses at the curb, and then how are they working with the different vendors or private companies that are demanding access to that curb, and then how does that look from a pricing perspective, which gets into the whole other side of it from a city perspective. But I think this could be very informative for a lot of different entities.
Yeah, thank you very much for your positive comments and the questions for this, Melissa. So, because actually I want to mention that when we do the research, our purpose is we just notice there are so many modes, mobility service over the network. And, we want to understand how this service mode and mobility service, how they interact with each other, and how their individual trips distributed over the network. And from there, could we find some more useful insight, such as, Melissa mentioned about the curve-based usage exchange, and also maybe the transit and the micromobility maybe can cooperate at some area, or right now some Uber, Lyft, and also backbone transportation transit network, if their potential area and some corridor, and we can help to connect this kind of mobility, shared mobility with backbone transit network better. So, with those questions in the mind, one way we can start in the past is we focus on the origin destination of the trip. Basically, we give a lot of attention to demand, where the demand generated, where the demand ended. But for this study, we want to move a little bit more further, that we want to also get into give a deep understanding about how this trip distributed over the network. Because anyway, origin is generated demand, and destination, of course, drop demand. But how they use the network results over the network, how they use different routes, it still gives us some very useful insight. So that, I think for the planner and the MPO, or also public agency, they can take this insight to plan their service distribution over time and over space. So this gives us, a different angle to better planning how to use the network results, route, curve space, or some other, network results to, to cooperate different mobility service over the whole city level. So this is, exactly what we want to do, and we want to this project can help.
Great, Matthew.
Dr. Du, thank you for your work. You have heard some of the national crisis with bus driver shortages for school transportation. Here in Durham alone, we are short 100 school bus drivers. For public schools currently, there is much need to migrate from door-to-door stops to neighborhood consolidated stops. And so our average distance from home to the school bus stop, the neighborhood community stop, a mobility hub, if you will, is about 5-6 miles. And that is low. In many school systems, it's 6-7 miles. So I would love to maybe hear from you on how this could be applied towards addressing some of the first mile, last mile problems, not only for transit, but also school bus service. And we would be open to discussing with you offline as well. Thank you for your research.
Yeah, great. That's a very great question. And I'm very happy that, Matthew, you bring this question here. Actually, we do used to think about the first mile, last mile gap for school bus, because we want to understand, how people, drive their kids to school. Most of the time, from my knowledge, is some people just a private drive, and some people they do carpool, and because some parents they know each other, they do carpool, and most of them they use school bus. And also, I don't know if you know that they are actually a private company in Gainesville, and they call it School on Wheel or something. They provide private sector service for driving kids to school. So we actually think about, we want to understand, how those parents or, school kids located over the city, and also what's the current school bus route, and also what's the availability of other, service can use to, to pick up and drop kids. Combine them together, if we can keep a better service that cooperate their mobility and their time and their, facility. So I used to discuss with some FDOT people and also some stakeholder, for example, for that School on Wheel people, and they all show very strong interest to collaborate, but we just didn't get a chance to set up a project and really work on it. Maybe we can discuss more in the, after that, and figure out there's some opportunity we can work together on this topic. Thank you.
Great. Jacob, and this will be our last question in this part.
Okay. So great work, Lily, especially your network perspective and also focus on this trajectory, right? So I'm the person who only focuses on the origins and destinations when I study similar problems, because that's the only data available to me in a lot of cases. So I wonder, how do you deal with the data challenge, the lack of data, especially for Uber Lyft? It's very hard to get the data from them that precisely tell us the origin and destination. And also, to Melissa's point, it's very difficult to understand the interaction between different modes because we only have data for one given mode. We don't know how people link different legs of their trip if they use different modes. So user perspective also is the data challenge. So how do you deal with these challenges?
Oh, that's a very good question. For data, basically I think your question is about the data source. So for this project, we got the open source data for DiDi service in China, and basically they provide the trajectory data for ride sharing, service provided by DiDi in a big city such as Chengdu. So we also can get the GPS data of bus. Actually, for bus, we don't require very detailed GPS data because it has a fixed route and a fixed schedule, and we can use that data. But if you can collect the real-time arriving and the drop data at each individual station, that's going to be even better. And for that is for in my current project, when I do that project, I don't have back data yet. But I definitely know there are some company and also some researchers, they have the back trajectory data, such as Arizona. So, and also for private vehicle and also, of course, for Uber Lyft, because they are private sector, it's very hard to get their data. But for some private auto, you definitely can get it from the third party private sector. And you can purchase those kind of trajectory data. I also contact, basically we present our work at, Here Technology, and because they actually collect a huge deal of trajectory data, and they are very interested in this project because this project definitely should make them convinced that the trajectory data will give us more comprehensive insight. They actually have very, can provide the trajectory data for private auto over almost all the cities. So I would like to say trajectory data right now is well available in different resources. And then what we need to do is we just need to reach out and get those results and help us in the city level planning and operation.
Great, thank you so much, Lily. That was a great presentation and a really interesting project.
Thank you.
Now going to move on. Virginia Sisiakpaku from Alabama is going to talk about a questionnaire on transportation user behavior.
Hello, I'm Virginia Sisiakpaku from UAB, and the product that I would like to introduce is a questionnaire survey of transportation user behaviors. Our goal in our study was to gain some insights into users' attitudes, preferences, and choices toward TNC services, transportation network services like Uber and Lyft. The questionnaire that we developed was part of a strike project called Technology Influence on Travel Demand and Behaviors. So it is broadly recognized that user travel preferences, attitudes, and perceptions affect mode choices. And so understanding the motivators and barriers becomes important for addressing travelers' needs in general and facilitating adoption of new modes and services in particular. This was our motivation for this part of the study and the development of the questionnaire. When new travel modes are introduced, service providers and planners alike need to know first what are the reasons that make travelers switch from their current mode preference to the new mode or not? Secondly, what are the impacts of those choices on network performance? In order to answer such questions, the stakeholders need some tools and models that they can use to help them understand the impacts of travelers' choices in the markets where new travel modes are introduced. The way to go often is to develop a detailed questionnaire survey that can be used to document these behaviors and preferences. Each survey is different, so our product can be used as a sample for others to replicate, but the steps that one takes in order to have a successful survey study are similar. So typically you need to select the survey platform. That was Qualtrics platform in our case. You need to carefully select the questions that you would like to put in the survey and develop the questionnaire and then pretest the survey instrument to make sure that it is easy to follow and captures the answers to the questions that you need to address. Often you need an IRB approval or exemption since it will involve human subjects. And then you have to have an approach to recruit participants, either directly or indirectly using some kind of a service. And then when the surveys start coming in, you have to check them carefully to do a soft launch first and then a full launch, but always make sure that the surveys are complete, clean up the responses before you analyze and interpret the results. In our study, we asked participants to report detailed trip information for a full typical day, 24 hours. It was like a travel diary, if you wish, because these inputs were important for some modeling effort that we have conducted as part of our project. So they had to report it the origin and destination of each trip they took during a typical day, the travel time, the trip purpose, and the travel mode that they used. And then we had follow-up questions that asked why they used this mode, and especially focusing on the use of TNCs like Uber and Lyft. And also if they didn't use or they didn't select the mode, why they don't like to use the particular mode. We also, of course, had the standard questions about demographic data that we used to perform our analysis and interpretation of the survey findings. I should emphasize here that transportation users' perceptions vary from place to place. So the instrument that we call our product can be used to understand determinants that drive people towards the use of TNC services or other modes at other locations, but sometimes I think that some changes and adaptations may be needed so that you have a good representation of local conditions. Understanding users' attitudes and preferences toward new modes of transportation is important because it helps us document needs as well as identify implementation barriers and opportunities of the local markets. And with this information, the planners and stakeholders can make informed decisions regarding deployment, marketing, policies, and so on, in order to better serve the needs of the transportation users. Our survey is available through Stride. If you have questions or need additional information, feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Virginia. Now we'll have a little bit of time for questions. I guess, Virginia, I'm curious of how you see this product and this survey that your group developed fitting into the sort of current landscape of public agency travel data acquisition, both in terms of passive data that they buy from the data aggregators or many of particularly metropolitan planning organizations conduct collect survey data to in order to develop their long-term travel models. So where do you see your survey fitting in? How would it be useful?
Yes, thank you, Noreen, for the question. I think this survey was a little different than the typical ones because we acquired information about a typical 24-hour day. And so these details actually are useful for those researchers and agencies that are looking for using activity-based models rather than the traditional models for predicting travel demand. And this is an important, more recent development in this area. I think the reason being that with these models, we can now, first of all, have more realistic modeling that represents better the behaviors and the actual, travel patterns. So people don't just go from home to work and back. They go from home to drop off the kid and then to work and then to shopping and then back. So I think these models need to capture this type of behavior. And by using a tool like ours, we can actually get a sample population that gives us all these details about their 24-hour travel activity. And so these activity models were, that can benefit from this information also have a better, provide better opportunities to integrate different modes. And so we've been working on modeling efforts with the Maxim model. And so the survey served as a feeding component to that model to create a larger a population of traveler population from a sample that we have received. So this is one way to benefit agencies that are looking at models that are representing more realistically the travel behaviors.
Great, thank you. Did any of our, it looks like Jacob has a question.
Yeah, so Virginia, understanding transportation user behavior, the equity aspect of it is becoming more and more important. At least being recognized, it's always important, but increasingly being recognized. So I'm curious, what's your experience in best approaches to engage folks who were historically underrepresented in the transportation data set samples that other previous research have collected?
Mm-hmm. This is an excellent question, and it's not an easy, there is no easy answer right there, out there. I think the best way to do that is to have surveys that are not limited. And so, often because we have to engage those participants and we have to pay for the surveys and so on, we limit the number of responses. And that does not allow us to have a representative sample of underrepresented users. So we've done another survey here at UAB, and we pretty much distribute the survey to all our employees and all our students, and even took additional steps to send this not only electronically, but also to reach out to people that do not drive or do not have any, do not use an email address. And for this effort, we were able to collect about 10,000 responses, which I think it was above and beyond our expectations. And there, by collecting specific information about the demographics, for example, about the employment or the annual income and so on, we were sure that we could use this information to really represent the UAB community in that survey. So there are methods to do that, but I think it is hard if we have a limited number of responses collected. And it is definitely something that needs more attention, because from my experience, often, we just disregard this discrepancy in our survey responses. So it's an excellent point.
Great. Well, if there's no other questions right now, we actually have an opportunity to continue this conversation, but to be thinking across all 5 presentations, and really, I think across the comments that the panelists and the audience have brought up as we're talking. And so what I've been curious about, and I think Melissa's questions have really been pushing me to think about this, is as a consortium of university researchers that's developing really cutting edge products, but in a complex world where there are many private sector companies doing related work, how do you see a university consortium such as Stride being able to add the most value, or maybe particularly to navigate that complicated landscape of private sector providers in this space? And I guess, Melissa, I may actually put you on the hot seat first, just because some of I thought your comments were really quite helpful in sort of bringing up this issue of where is that niche, where is the value add that might not be covered by either some of the providers themselves or some of the data aggregators.
Wow, okay. So I guess this is where I've always wrestled, right? I live in both worlds of the research world and the implementation world and the local government world. So I've always tried to work with researchers to help fill some of what we need to inform our operation on a very small scale. But to really sort out where research and implementation comes into play, it's so tough because the space is evolving so rapidly, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. It's been a shakeup in every segment of the transportation delivery system. And I think a lot of what I've heard today is talking about open platform and working to really just, the goals of the research is more about, how do we make it a better transportation system to deliver people to where they want to go? And I think most vendors, that's not really their perspective, right? Most vendors are, how can they make the most money to fill a need or serve a purpose? So I would think that any of the research that's going on, just to be aware of some of the stuff that exists in the space, but then seeing if there's a way to stitch it together. And we just had this conversation earlier today. I was on a call with a vendor that has, the overarching API that we can plug in different things to help deliver transportation system coordinated fashion. I think that's where researchers really can be helpful to identify, how to make that more efficient. How do we better serve the gaps? Kind of like what Dr. Du is talking about with the identifying where's the exchange of uses happening, and how can we use that data? And I think that's where researchers can come into play the most, is how can we use the data to help inform? And I think a lot of operations and a lot of local governments and a lot of other agencies that are in charge at managing this right of way, they don't understand necessarily how to ask for what they need, or I guess really understand the benefit of the research and how it can translate into informing what they're doing. So I don't have an answer per se, but I think that there's a lot of good work that's going on, and I don't know where there's crossover. I don't know if it's, going to different sorts of conferences that are outside the usual academic realm. I know TRB is a place that's very heavy research, but not really heavy on, practitioners. And I think I can point to a number of conferences across I'm going to a conference at the end of the month that's for parking and mobility that I really don't think there's going to be any researchers at, but there's going to be an entire expo center full of vendors who are selling their products. So I don't know if maybe there's some, and it's hard to say, why don't the researchers try going to some other conferences, because then that's money. So it's, I don't know what the answer is necessarily, but maybe looking at some of those other industry associations outside of academia, that might be helpful to see where those niches are.
Yeah, I think it's actually an excellent answer. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
I just talked long enough till I got to something.
I wanted to ask Matthew to comment on this as well.
Thank you, Noreen. I'm excited about this question. Okay, I'm going to bring a little. Been with Stride for 10 years, both as a grad student and in my doctoral program. I've worked on a number of Stride-funded projects, and I have to say, just full stop. School transportation is a $10 billion a year public service that we provide. In nearly every community in the US, school systems are the largest transit operator, right? And the study that Mr. Monest and Dr. Steiner shared with us earlier is a good example of where these public benefits, and I would encourage Stride to lean into the gaps between what Melissa does and what I do, right? I route school buses and build schools. She's looking at transit service and mobility, and yet no one's really looking at the intersection of the two. And I would even go to Virginia's most recent presentation on user perceptions and experience. I really do believe that the 5,000 trips in the K-12 continuum from kindergarten through 12th grade, that's over 5,000 trips from home to school. That's codifying travel behaviors for children who are not only your future mode users, they are your current mode users. And so when we are leaning in one way or another, and it varies by state and funding, and we can get all into the regulations and finances around school travel, it is a woefully understudied area of public service. I've spent most of my career in it, and I can't reconcile, other than it seems to be that research follows private investment more than public investment. We've spent exhaustive time on the composition of tires or road weight speeds or traffic signalization, minimal to no time on some of the core operational characteristics of school transportation. And the people who suffer don't make these conferences, don't make these meetings. They're children, right? They're children. And they're also school educators who are given very constrained budgets and asked to perform miracles daily. So if you're thinking about where an institutional consortium like Stride could collaborate, focusing on those public goods that no one else is paid to cover, have enormous near and long-term sustainability and travel mode implications, would be a wonderful charge for this team, especially with the talent you have on this team. It's extraordinarily unique to have some of the world's leading researchers on this topic in this consortium. So that's just a 10-year perspective from me as a practitioner now.
I really want to jump in to echo what Matthew said. As a researcher myself, like you see the work that Sheila presented, we work together. Our motivation as faculty in universities, we are not trying to compete with private vendors to make money. Our main motivation comes from the fact we want to find areas that there are public benefits from our research, and those public benefits may not have the revenue that the private vendors can pursue. So then there's the question, how can we researchers work with practitioners? I think that's the core of Noreen's question, which is very challenging. I recently had a conversation with our collaborator from Ford, the data scientist in Ford versus data scientist in university. We discussed the difference. So the conclusion is researchers, we are more interested in, tend to be very interested in basic research. We are question driven, we are hypothesis driven. We hope the knowledge can have enduring value, but often the work we do takes time, and also it does not address the pressing problems that companies or cities agencies face on a daily basis. The data scientists in Ford, they describe their work as putting out fire. The business unit give them assignments on a daily basis. You need to immediately figure out from the data what's the problem here and there. And that's just not the way that universities can do, right? But how to bridge these two? From my own experience, since I've been to UF, I really enjoyed working with people surrounding me, like Melissa being here, and people, Melissa's colleague, Jesus, and etc. from the traffic engineering side. It has never been a place where we have champions in public entities that can provide data to us just in the same day, and also provide good research questions for us to think about and telling us what are the needs of the research they want to see, so that when we do our research, it's not always so conceptual, so basic that cannot produce value for the industry, for the practice. So I think being able to, like Melissa, having people like Melissa who can appreciate, who can have the patience of seeing the value of our work, that's super important. Thanks.
Matthew, I have a question for you regarding how to better work with the schools. I've worked in 4 different cities, and every school system's been extremely different in how the transportation operated for the school buses in particular. But I can tell you that locally we get asked a lot to transport students, and working with the school boards have been difficult at best. There's a lot of restrictions around the data that can be shared and how they can collaborate. So do you have any suggestions on how to approach working with the transportation from the school systems?
You know, and we're here in Durham, North Carolina. We have 1 school system, 1 city, and 1 county. I'll share with you briefly just that we have a collaboration called the Durham Youth Go Pass, which encourages our transit agencies to provide school transportation to middle and high school students with a simple, a general user Go Pass that's accessible for free to them. I do think that there's also value in some of our crossover work between school bus ridership and transit, insofar as our buses are the ones that are either stopping door to door or neighborhood community stops, which induce congestion, which impacts the transit ridership. And so for our staff, my team, when I lift back to them the analysis like Kai shared today, even looking at where I think we were in a meeting with our MPO in Durham Public Schools and talking about, you could see the value of that illustrative spatial data of, oh, here's how, though our funding and regulation bodies are entirely at different levels, here's how the coordination of our work could be beneficial for both institutions. And so leaning into some of the existing values and priorities, often that are in a strategic plan for a school system, is a great way to align with, right? It's so hard for schools because oftentimes someone will come and say, I think it'd be great if you did ... And there's 1,000 of things that happen like that. But when you get into initiatives that are already afoot, and that's what we've tried to do with some of the work with Kai and with Ruth.
Okay, well, maybe I can follow up with you guys to better understand how you worked together, because I think that would be really useful here, especially as we talk about things like mobility hubs and where the exchange of uses is happening. I think there's some efficiencies that could be gained from both perspectives. I'll give you the example of our microtransit that we are in a pilot phase on. The areas that we're picking up and dropping off folks has morphed into picking students up, high school and middle school age students, within the zones and taking them to school. So we're kind of providing this service, and it is free at the moment, but that wasn't the original intent. So that's what part of this whole pilot is. But I think that there is some use for expanding that service, but understanding how better to work with the school board, because it's just been such a difficult challenge. And I think I'd really like to follow up with you guys on some of that.
I'd like to take to respond to Melissa's question too. Going through this whole process of trying to access the school data and the concerns about children and whether we're going to have actual stop locations or actual names and addresses, I've trying to wrap my head around how a transit agency could effectively ask for that data, and I'm not sure that they could. I think being located, because we're in North Carolina State University, so we have the IRB process, and we have experience guarding data and keeping it separate. And so I'd almost recommend that you work with your friends at University of Florida as a kind of intermediary, because they can keep the data safe and create the confidence that your school boards are going to need.
Perfect. Well, I'm sure I can follow up with all of our UFTI folks that we work with to figure that out. Thanks.
They'll solve it just, tomorrow maybe. So this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm cognizant of time. I know all of your time is valuable. I wanted to see if there were any last questions from the audience, from the panelists, and from the researchers that shared videos, particularly focused on this topic of research translation and implementation. I guess I'll start with one that I will partially answer. As we think about the implementation side and the translation science aspects of our work, how do we do that better, I think has been a theme of this conversation. And I found it really helpful to sort of challenge my own ideas of who the stakeholders are, with some of the comments that we heard from the audience, who identified, maybe emphasized different stakeholders or emphasized stakeholders that weren't in our heads or were more specific, right? So an example is this idea that has come up in a few times, and I think Melissa used the term mobility hub and exchange of uses. And so we might say this will help people plan better, but I think what this work challenges us to do is think about that with more specificity, and the idea that we want to develop a tool that can identify where the exchange of uses is happening, and that it's that dialogue and that level of intentionality that can ultimately bring great value, I think, to the research and also to the communities that we're engaging with. Matthew?
Noreen, in hearing Melissa share about mobility hubs, that just brought me back to across industries. Sometimes there's a full service that can be provided from not just the research component of the STRIDE team, but also the instructional side. Words matter, and what Melissa might call something, if I understood or our Board of Education understood what she was actually talking about, we would be all over it and be like, oh, I want to know all about that. And so sometimes we get into our silos where two professions, two industries can be talking about the same idea or have aligned interests or challenges even, but they may not call them the same thing. And so while I'm reading about, a certain concept, there's a wonderful translation process that can occur. And it goes back to incentivizing, promoting, and lowering the barriers to collaboration across multiple levels of jurisdictions between state, city, county, school systems. So we may not use the same terms, but we're thinking about a lot of the same challenges. And even some of the innovative best practices, I think there's a lot in there that sometimes we kind of can get very technical in naming things. But what it actually means is extraordinarily applicable to maybe an adjacent industry.
Great. Well, I think we could let Matthew be the last word for this wonderful session that we've been able to have today. I think I so appreciate all the work that STRIDE has done, both in promoting the research and encouraging dialogue, and also particularly to Ondine and Inez for organizing today's event. I also want to take a big thank you to all of the panelists who gave up their time, and I think really encourages us to have a much deeper conversation, as well as to all the researchers who prepared the videos and then were available today to answer questions. I did want to remind you that there are 2 more sessions similar to this. Day 2 will be focused on advanced strategies and technologies for congestion mitigation, and Day 3 on equity in transportation. So thank you again for your time. We do have a closing video which will talk about this, but thanks very much. Bye.